Upgrade your game day with Team Toyota. Headed to the practice fields or the stadium? We have a great selection of new trucks and SUVs to choose from. And with our lineup of over 200 certified used Toyotas, you can find the right fit for you or for your budget. 75 used cars under $20K. Don't get stuck on the sidelines. Our service centers are here to get you back on the road in no time. Visit one of our 3 locations in Princeton, Langhorne, or Glen Mills, or online at teamtoyota.net. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Phillies Talk Podcast presented by Team Toyota. I'm Corey Seidman with Spencer McKercher and Phillies pre- and post-game live producer Sean Kane here with you on a Friday morning heading into the holidays. So happy holidays, everybody. Hope you have a great weekend. The Phillies got some shopping done just before Christmas. They have this reported deal with Max Kepler, the outfielder, 1 year, $10 million. So we've known all along, guys, that the Phillies needed to add an outfielder. This was not someone specifically on my radar because I was assuming it was going to be a right-handed bat. But the Phillies make this move. I still personally, we're going to get into all the ramifications of this contract, but I personally feel they still have a lot of work to do. But Spence, let's start with you. What did you think of this addition of Max Kepler?
Yeah, one, I love that we got the whole crew back together here after the big news. Max Kepler is a Philadelphia Philly. The 1 year, $10 million deal, dude. We were just kind of talking about it before we started here. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know what it does for the Phillies other than it's basically a small improvement other than with Austin Hayes. Corey mentioned it, the injuries coming in. He'll be 32 in February. Spent his entire career so far in Minnesota. Everything that's come out of Minnesota and everybody that's covered him and all the fans, it sounds like he's been a stand-up, class-up guy. They've loved him. Everyone's loved covering him. So that's great. It's just, I don't know if he can get back to his old self, especially when you turn 32 there and you're coming off an injury-ridden season. We'll see what happens. But if 10 being I was super stoked about it, 1 being I didn't really care, I'd put it about a 4. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. And how about you, Kane? What did you think of this Max Kepler move? I mean, he did have a down year in 2024. He missed time early with a knee injury and then late with a patellar tendonitis injury that he missed the final month. Struck me as very similar to the Jordan Romano deal where it's like a 1 year contract and you're thinking, okay, this has a chance to hit, but it's not allocating a ton of money or years.
Yeah, I'm with you, Corey. He wasn't on my radar. It's surprising. You mentioned, the left-handed bat, who's very good against right-handed pitching and not as good against left-handed pitching, which is the same story as Brandon Marsh. So he's not a platoon partner for Brandon Marsh, clearly. So they're in a good spot against left-handed pitching with Marsh and Kepler and Castellanos, but obviously against right-handed pitching, they don't have a lot of answers right now because Marsh and Kepler have both struggled there. Obviously, Rojas could be a platoon partner with Marsh perhaps in center, but then you would still need a platoon partner for Kepler. And then the other thing for me is defensively. I mean, Kepler's played his whole career in right field. That's where Nick Castellanos has played literally every game for the last handful of years for the Phillies. So something's got to give there. Either Castellanos or Kepler moving to left field, you would think. And I guess my guess would be Kepler moving, but we'll see how they handle that. So, yeah, I mean, offensively and defensively, I think there's a lot of questions remaining in terms of this signing. And it certainly was a surprise to me. And I agree with Spencer, good guy. And he certainly produced when healthy. And, I don't dislike him as a player necessarily, but I do question the fit with the Phillies.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's something else that has to happen here. And I do think there's going to be something else that happens either in conjunction with this move or just before spring training, before opening day, all that. Because like right now, the outfield picture is still incomplete. You need platoon partners for both Brandon Marsh and Max Kepler. And people can say all they want that, we think Marsh can be an everyday player. We think no, I mean, it hasn't happened. Like the production has not panned out. And if you get into a situation where the offense is slumping, what's the first move you're going to look to do in that situation? It's going to be to optimize the platoon advantage. So if you were playing Marsh every day or playing Kepler every day and the offense is struggling, that would be the first thing you look to fix. So to go into a season expecting that they're going to play either of those guys every day, I just don't think you've been paying attention to the actions if anybody thinks that. Like I got a tweet from somebody last night saying that it's going to be and this guy said this with like confidence too, that it's going to be Marsh and Rojas platooning in center, Kepler and Weston Wilson platooning in left. To me, that would be a failure of an offseason. You'd go into next season with even worse, maybe the same team, maybe even worse of a team when you look at the NL landscape. I know that the payroll is a huge component of all this because, the Phillies have spent a lot of money in recent years, and there's been almost like a taking for granted of the fact that they can just keep spending. But now you see that they're in a different tier than like the Mets. The Mets spending like $100 million last year and then going out and signing Juan Soto. So the Phillies, after this Max Kepler deal, which is not official yet, the team hasn't confirmed it yet. It was still pending a physical as of Thursday night. It was first reported by MLB.com, and then Jeff Passan had the terms 1 year, $10 million. But this deal, if it's $10 million, takes the Phillies to approximately $299 million as it pertains to the luxury tax. That's a serious number because you're paying a 92% penalty on every dollar over $291. Okay, so just the Max Kepler move, 1 year, $10 million, actually cost the Phillies $19.25 million, double what the player cost. So that price tag is going to have an impact on everything else they do this offseason. Like if they were to sign a $20 million player right now, that guy's costing closer to $40 million, not $20 million. So it's like almost like all those big contracts have come to roost at this point. The big difference is this year you have Zach Wheeler's extension kicking in. He goes from making $23 million to $42. You add Kepler, you add Romano, you have Suarez and Bohm, who basically double their salaries. You have Marsh and Stott, who go from making the league minimum to making $3 to $3.5 million through arbitration. So it's an additional $35 million. And last night when I went through all this in my head, the thought that I kept coming to was, man, is that Taijuan Walker $18 million burning a hole in the Phillies' pockets right now?
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's wild. When you put it kind of like, dude, when you throw it all together, and I feel like that's, something, Corey, you're really good at is kind of like taking all that information in and the numbers and all that stuff. But two, it's just like, yeah, when even an average fan would sit back and kind of look at all that money, you're like, oh my God. And then you sit and see, yeah, Taijuan Walker's still getting paid a lot of money to do a throwing program and see if he can get back to the player that he is. So I don't know. And like, Corey, I know you wrote it in your article last night. It's kind of like, all right, this move then takes away any of those big name guys, like, those kind of like tier 2 guys with Profar and Santander and any of those outfield guys that were on the market still. And that's pretty much gone. Those dreams, not saying 100%, obviously no one knows, but those dreams are pretty much gone, right?
Well, Santander, I never saw as like a fit. I mean, is a guy who struck me as someone who's going to get overpaid. I think the same might happen of Teoscar Hernandez, who's just like in an advantageous position, having a really good year for a world champion when he was on a 1 year contract. Phillies, I think, did have some interest in Hernandez. I would think that, this precludes them from signing one of those guys unless they just linger in free agency until, February and are willing to sign for like pennies on a dollar. But like Jurickson Profar, I'm sure he's wanting to sign a multi-year deal finally after never being able to do that. And I think that Hernandez and Santander are going to want 5 years. One of the things I wrote is that like the Phillies, if these signings do click, that's a big if. I mean, Romano and Kepler both spent a lot of time on the shelf in 2024, and those were down years. That's why they were available on these 1 year contracts. If those signings click, the Phillies will have solved their two biggest holes for a lot less money than it would have taken to sign Jeff Hoffman or Tanner Scott or Teoscar Hernandez. They will have allocated a lot fewer dollars, and they won't have further tied up an inflexible roster with a 5 year contract. Now, that's like the rosy scenario. The other part of it is, okay, what if they get hurt? What if they don't perform? What if this is another Austin Hayes situation? I saw people saying that Max Kepler is going to be this year's Whit Merrifield. It's a totally different player. I'll say that. I mean, like watching Max Kepler from afar all these years, he's a guy who I still think has some good years left in him. And, he can be, especially against righties, like a 260 bat with power, with some speed, with really good right field defense. You guys mentioned the Nick Castellanos component earlier. I don't know which way this is going to go, but when you look at the fact that Kepler since like 2015, I believe, has more defensive runs saved among right fielders than anybody in baseball, it's like you're signing a guy like that. Aren't you signing him to do what he's good at? And so I don't know. I could see it going either way. I could also see the Phillies moving him to left field and spinning it as like, okay, left field at Citizens Bank Park can be tricky with the left center field wall. But what do you think of that whole thing, Sean?
Yeah, no, I mentioned that earlier. Defensively, it's interesting, and just getting back to like the big picture that you laid out, like with their offseason to this point, it feels to me like they know they need to shake it up a little bit. Like they ran it back last year, and great regular season. Well, great, first couple months of the regular season. Then they were essentially a 500 club, and then flamed out in the playoffs. And it feels like they need to shake. They can't run it back again. They want to shake it up, but you pointed out the payroll inflexibility given where they are right now, so they can't go out and obviously not going to sign the Juan Sotos of the world, but even those guys, the Bregmans, it seems like that isn't probably going to happen. And then maybe, okay, they could work out a trade. And I don't know, like if you believe the reports, it seems like maybe they're overvaluing like what Bohm could bring back. If you believe some of these, the Astros report that they tried to offer him for Tucker in a package, and the Mariners report that they wanted a couple big arms for him. So it just seems like they're kind of stuck. I mean, the 1 year deals with Mano and Kepler, if they work out, great. But it just seems like big picture wise, they want to do something. They want to try to mix up their lineup a little bit. And obviously Kepler does that to some degree. But it just feels to me like they're kind of in no man's land right now. And they're just kind of looking for a way out of it. Now, there's still a couple months, obviously, before spring training. But it just seems like they're kind of looking for answers on how to mix this up a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I wonder if the Phillies could go back in time 2 months and like restart this offseason, how they would have gone about the process. A lot of it's been out of their control. I mean, they knew that they were going to be on like the very periphery of a Soto discussion anyway, and then the Mets come in and just totally change the picture with the way that they exploded that negotiation process. But yeah, like the Bohm component of it, it's a very interesting topic to me because I can see why the Phillies are valuing him the way they are, and I can see why other teams aren't. Right? Like the Phillies are looking at it like this is a guy who's hit like 280 to 300 for a bulk of the last 3-4 years, not finishing at that, but spending seasons in that range. 97 RBIs 2 years in a row, hits with runners in scoring position, was an all-star last year. They look at that like this guy should have a ton of trade value. You're getting 2 years of an all-star third baseman, right? Whereas other teams are saying, okay, in his best year, Bohm was like a 3-WAR player, right? And front offices are looking at that like, okay, this guy's defense is probably going to decline as he ages. The speed's probably going to decline as he ages. The power really has never developed to the 30 home run range, So I think other teams are like nitpicking, whereas the Phillies are seeing all the good of Alec Bohm. That's what you do with your player. So like I saw, there was that report last week that it was a national report that, the Phillies wanted Mason Miller, or they asked for Mason Miller, the A's closer, in exchange for Bohm, and that like the A's hung up the phone. And like I saw Jim Bowden, the former GM, say like he referred to that as like a ludicrous ask by the Phillies. I don't think that's a ludicrous ask. Like, yeah, Mason Miller is a great young reliever, but we're talking about an everyday player versus a reliever. I don't care if you have 5 years of club control left versus 2. The everyday component versus the reliever component matters. So I think that was a little crazy the way that like got discussed online. I don't even know if that's true, the Bohm for Miller thing, but I can see why it's taken time here. I can see why no move has been made, and really, I could see Bohm being there in spring training. Not the worst scenario in the world for the Phillies if he is, because he's still a productive player. But yeah, that has really almost like stagnated the entire Phillies offseason because we don't know if there are big things that are brewing or going to actually happen, or if it's going to just be this tinkering on the edges like Kepler and Romano.
Yeah, it's that seesaw effect, right? And especially, Corey, when we were down in the winter meetings and we talked about on the last few pods of like Rob Thompson and Dave Dombrowski put it in our faces like they're not shopping Alec Bohm. Scott Boras basically said the same thing. He's not getting that idea. And then all of a sudden you're still getting all these reports of like, oh yeah, well, they're getting denied by this team and they're getting hung up by this team and whatever. I'm still going to go into spring training thinking that Alec Bohm is going to start at third base for the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't see anything changing. I don't know if I agree with that. But that's what's going to happen. And, if it just doesn't make sense if these teams are actually hanging up on them. Corey, I'm with you where like the Mason Miller thing, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Just because, like you said, you have an everyday, he's an all-star. I mean, he has, like you said, he had 97 RBIs. He was the best hitter for 3 months. You want to kind of build this whole new thing in Oakland, or now not in Oakland, but in Sacramento. And then you go to Vegas. You start with a young player like that, who has a lot of pop and a lot of power and a lot of stardom. We'll see, but
yeah. I was going to ask both you guys. Corey, you obviously cover the team on a daily basis, and you're around Alec Bohm in the clubhouse, and Spencer over there, for home games on the road. You guys are both in spring training. I feel like if Bohm is back, there's like 2 ways this can go for a player. Like chip on his shoulder in a good way. Like, okay, you want to shop me? I'm going to show you. I'm motivated. Or you can kind of like mope around. They don't really want me. And I don't know. Obviously, there were some questions at the throughout last season, especially towards the end of last season, about Bohm's kind of, the way he handled things and his makeup and his frustration. And you saw the helmet spikes get more and more frequent. If he is back after everything we've heard and read this offseason, how do you think he handles it? How do you think it goes? And will it be a good thing? And maybe he's a little more motivated. Might it go the other way?
Well, I mean, you look at how he handled the "I hate this place" thing, and you think, okay, this is a guy who's been able to mature, and even hours after an emotional situation like that was able to kind of like step back and accept his own role in it. I don't think that he's going to pout and show up, being a bad teammate, because another part of that is that I'm sure he's going to, if that scenario plays out, he's going to go into spring training already having like weeks of thinking about, okay, it's important that I be a professional about this. It's not like it's going to be the first time he thinks about it when he shows up. But, Spence mentioned like Rob Thompson and Dave Dombrowski saying that they're not shopping Bohm. Like, of course they're going to say that, though. Like, it doesn't behoove either person to say, yes, we're shopping Alec Bohm. Like, you don't want to publicly say that, that might piss off a player. You don't want to decrease any leverage you have. So, of course, like every manager and general manager or president of baseball operations in that spot is going to say that, and the Phillies had to say something because there was so much speculation and talk and rumors about Bohm going into the winter meetings that if they came out of it saying nothing, that would have been telling to Bohm, right? If you're Scott Boras, he comes out and says that everything he's heard is that Bohm is going to be the Phillies' third baseman. Same thing. Doesn't behoove them for Boras to come out and say, oh yeah, they're aggressively shopping him around like that. That makes his client look less attractive, right? If it's being perceived as like, okay, this guy can be had. I don't think that means that they're not listening. I just think that the right offer hasn't materialized to this point. But certainly, this offseason has not played out to this point the way I would have expected. Like I'm going back to mid-October when Dombrowski and Thompson talked in that year-end press conference. We asked Dave Dombrowski directly about the payroll going into 2025, and he said, we haven't sat down yet and had that final discussion, but I have no indication that we're not going to continue to be aggressive. Well, they really haven't. And I'm not faulting them, because at a certain point, all of those contracts you dole out that you have to pay for it. And that's kind of what's happening to the Phillies at this point, but it has not been nearly as aggressive an offseason as I would have expected. That being said, everything we're saying, there could be a big move that happens in January. Like the JT Real Mutual trade happened very late in that offseason, and it totally changed the entire complexion of that offseason, right? So that could happen this year too. But as we sit here, it just still looks to me like, okay, you signed an outfielder, you still need another, at least one or two. You signed a reliever. If that doesn't work, you're really thin at the back end. So, it's not like the perfect situation that they've set up over the last couple of months. There's risk, there's potential reward.
Sean, going back to Bohm and Corey, you're exactly right. I don't think he will pout, but even like that response to "I hate this place," that was through a lot of help from veteran leadership in the clubhouse too. Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, all those guys that kind of rallied around him and, kind of let him how to handle it. And he has matured in that sense. It is going to be interesting though to see like when I think he comes in confident into spring training and ready to go. But that is a wild thing to think about, and in terms of if he is upset, maybe that turns it around. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't know if that will stop the chase rate. But going forward, but yeah, dude, Corey, I guess we kind of hinted on it a little bit. Yeah, this Phillies fans, we've been getting everything, all the messages and stuff of like, they're not, what are they doing? Why are they sitting on their hands? It's getting to the holiday season and still not really a big deal, but the entire free agent market, the entire trade market, I mean, we've seen Bellinger get traded. We've seen Devin Williams get traded, but the trade market is still kind of starting to heat up maybe a little bit. But like, Sean, I mean, do you think that there's going to be more of an opportunity and like things are going to start to heat up, or is it going to be like that 2018, 2019, 2020 offseason where things don't happen until like mid-February?
I mean, the timeline, I'm not positive, but I mean, I think something's going to have to give in terms of, like we talked about earlier, that they need to still address the outfield. They still need bats, that right-handed bats that can match up with left-handed pitching. So I don't know when it is. Corey referenced the JT Real Mutual deal being a little later, obviously. That was the Harper offseason, I believe, too, which obviously took forever. So they were kind of I think they signed JT obviously because he's a great player, but also, hey, Bryce, look, we just signed your buddy, and that obviously was a big part of it. But speaking of those guys, like obviously Bryce, in my opinion, I think he's been worth the contract, and then just what he means to the franchise and what he's produced on the field. But if the financial inflexibility is a big problem for them, they need guys. And Corey mentioned Taijuan Walker, and I hope that's not a lost cause, but I'm not very confident. Like, I don't think he's ever going to pitch to an $18 million a year guy, certainly. But like, Trey Turner, like he's been good, and when he's been on the field. But if he could, to my opinion, I don't think he's been a $300 million type player to this point. They need him to be an MVP type guy. Nick Castellanos is a $100 million guy. He's very streaky, as we all know. But those guys, and JT's getting a little older, but he's making big money. Like these guys that they've paid, that they need to play, in my opinion, better than they played last year, with the exception of Harper and Schwarber. I think those guys are delivering for the most part, and Wheeler, obviously, and Nola, in my opinion, too. But I don't know. If they can't add to anybody that's of significance because of where they are payroll-wise, they need these guys that they've been paying the last 4 or 5 years to step up and be better than they've been, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because like Trey Turner hit 295 last year with an 807 OPS, and that was still disappointing, like very disappointing in my opinion. I'm not just talking about like the total production, just what you expect of him versus, how he performed for vast stretches during that season. Like, yeah, he had a really hot span of like 5 weeks, but other than that, was just okay. The only two guys like that I would say three guys that performed up to their capabilities last year offensively: Harper, Schwarber, Bohm. That's it. Marsh, no. Stott, no. JT, no. Castellanos, no. Like streaky. So yeah, like Sean's absolutely right. These guys need to be as good as their build. And another, part of this offseason, another piece of this offseason and just going into the future here is Ranger Suarez, who's like the Phillies' most important players entering a walk year here. I guess Suarez and Schwarber, two guys entering walk years, very, vital pieces of this puzzle. We've been talking about Bohm. He's a Boras client. Bryce Harper's a Boras client. There are a lot of them on the Phillies. Ranger Suarez is now a Boras client. He signed on with Boras Corps last week, and it's no coincidence that he does that going into a contract year. I mean, a guy does that when he wants to be able to maximize value. I read it a few different ways. I don't know specifically which of these is true, maybe a little bit of all of them, maybe none of them, but I saw it as when you hire Boras, you're looking to maximize in free agency. So that said, okay, more likely that Suarez goes to free agency than re-signs with the Phillies. Could also be that previous representation wasn't advancing far enough in extension talks with the Phillies, and maybe Suarez felt Boras had a better chance to move that, over the finish line. But either way, it just says to me that they need to already be thinking about the rotation going into 2025 and beyond, because you might only have one more year of Ranger Suarez. Based on what pitching has cost in this market, he's going to make a ton. I mean, he might make $100 million looking at what some of these contracts have signed for, like Nate Eovaldi, 3 years, $75 million, 4 years older than Suarez will be next year at this time. 3 years, $63 million for Yusei Kikuchi. Hasn't been as good as Suarez the last couple of years. There was one other guy who signed for Luis Severino, 3 years, $67 million. Hasn't been as consistent as Suarez the last couple of years. I look at those deals, and to me, Suarez is like a 4 year, at least like a 4 year, $84 million pitcher, if not something bigger. So, you also think about that. Like, I'm sure that the Phillies are listening to offers on him, and, that might be a big piece of the offseason too, is if they move him for like an offensive piece. Maybe that's the platoon piece in the outfield for one of these positions, center field or left field.
I mean, it's to me, it makes sense that they would be listening to him at some offers for Ranger, but it is just crazy. Like we've said it multiple times on this podcast, just how many times that the fact that like we talked about him winning the Cy Young in June, and now it's like, all right, now what he could offer, could they afford him in the offseason next season after this contract expires? I don't know, man. And I do think him signing with Boras kind of means that he's going to test the free agent market if they don't get rid of him. So I think the Phillies, like you said, Cora, I think the Phillies know that. They could look to move him here, and that would be a pretty exciting trade, because I think you could get a lot back for Ranger Suarez, especially coming off the season that he had. Yeah, he had the injuries down the stretch and kind of fell off a cliff a little bit, but I still think he's one of the better pitchers in the National League right now. And obviously that demeanor that he has on the mound, and everyone loves him in the clubhouse too. So it'd be a big loss in the clubhouse. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what you could get back for him, but it would have to be positive and something that would solidify the lineup a little bit more.
Yeah, and Yeah, it would. I mean, you wouldn't be trading a guy like that to like free up payroll space or anything.
Right.
You'd be doing it for like a real return. Like there's some guys I think the Phillies might move just to clear up money. Like if they could get off $20 million in Nick Castellanos per year, they would,
Yeah.
I think at least.
Yeah.
But someone like Suarez, someone like Bohm, you're not doing that to dump salary. You're doing that to like bring in tangible value. Sean, when you look at what's left here, trade market, free agency, in terms of the position the Phillies are in, is it like what would be is there anything in particular you think the Phillies need to do or like would make you feel good going into the season that seems realistic given their financial position?
Yeah, I know we've talked a lot about the offense, but to me, like the bullpen, like Romano, I like that deal. Like I think when healthy, he's been very good. But if the net result of this offseason as it relates to the bullpen is Romano in, Hoffman and Estevez out, is that an upgrade? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like I don't know how much Jeff Hoffman would cost to bring back. He seems to love it here. He's popular in the clubhouse, but I get it. He's got a chance to cash in, and he's not a young guy, so they're going to have to whoever's going to have to pay for him. But to me, like the trusted guys as it stands now, Kerkering. Well, on the left-handed side, you got Alvarado, Strom, but then you have Kerkering, Romano. I mean, I know Dombrowski mentioned, we really like Tanner Banks. Like, I don't know, like, we're really going to be counting on Tanner Banks and some of these other guys you mentioned, Jose Ruiz, like to be in these late innings because, Estevez was your ninth inning guy. Hoffman was, for the most part, up until the playoffs, unfortunately, he was as high leverage as they had. So the bullpen, to answer your question, that's my long way of answering. Like, I still think the bullpen needs to be addressed in some fashion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be a benefit, like a net positive if you come away with Romano and you lose Hoffman and Estevez. Like the Phillies are hoping that like Kerkering steps in as a lights out setup man and that Romano can become, a lights out 8th/9th inning guy and that Strom's just as good as he was last year. But like Jose Alvarado, huge enigma. Are you getting the Jose Alvarado that was one of the most dominant relievers in baseball for like an 18-month stretch? Or are you getting the roller coaster ride of 2024 and of previous seasons? The Phillies are, like, it's almost like they're hoping as of right now, a lot can change. It's December 20th. There's a lot of offseason to go. They could make big, impactful additions. As of right now, looks to me like they're kind of just hoping that things go right again. Yep. They look at this as a team that's still one of the best in the National League, and it is. Like, that's kind of the crazy thing in all of this is that, if you were just, tuning into this podcast after not paying attention to the Phillies for a few months, it might sound like doom and gloom, and yet they're still one of the best rosters in baseball. That's true. It's just that the Dodgers are better. The Mets are better. The Mets were a lot better at the end of last season. The Braves are going to be healthier. So if all that matters to the Phillies is whether they're able to succeed or fail in October, and those are the teams you're going to be up against, and those teams have improved, then, it's tough to get people too excited about like the path that's been charted so far this offseason.
Go ahead. No, go. I was just going to say real quick that, like, I think it's, yes, regardless. And I saw the report that, an executive came out and said that, there's still a top 4 roster in baseball. There's still a top 3 roster in the National League, even if they don't change anything here up until March 31st, whatever opening day is. However, Corey, like the Dodgers just won the World Series and they are getting better. The Mets are getting better. The Braves are getting healthier and still getting better. Like, I think you can't just sit in your hands. Yes, the roster's great, but I don't think you can sit in your hands and be like, all right, well, those guys, the Dodgers literally just won the World Series and they signed Blake Snell. Like, what are we doing?
And they're going to have Ohtani in their rotation.
Correct. Like, they went and got better even after winning the World Series, and their roster was unbelievable. And yes, they might lose Teoscar and whoever else, but it's still, I don't think you can sit here and be like, all right, well, the defending World Series champions go out and they're getting better, but we're, the Phillies are just going to sit here and not do anything. Go ahead, Sean.
No, I was just going to ask you guys, like, how would you rank like the division right now? If you had to go 1, 2, 3, I mean, we've talked about the Braves, Acuna's back, Strider's back, Riley's back. They all missed significant time. You add them to Ozuna and Olsen and Albies in the core they have. And obviously they lost Max Fried, but they still have some decent arms. And the Mets doing what they did. Now, how would you guys rank it? Like right now, if the season started tomorrow and you had to make your NL East predictions, where would you have the Phillies in that pecking order of 1, 2, 3?
I'd probably have the Phillies on par with the Braves and the Mets behind both of them. This is if the season began today. The Mets, to me, still have a very incomplete roster. They have 4 good hitters at the top of their lineup. They have a good closer. And what else do they have? They have a rotation. They have a rotational, like number 3 to number 4 starters. The 6 through 9 is okay, but it's not anything special in the lineup. So Mets still have a lot of work to do. I think the Braves are going to be back to like 95 to 100 wins if Acuna and Strider are healthy. Even losing Fried, they have like that guy Schwellenbach who really impressed last year. They have Schaufer who's getting older. So I think that I don't know what the over-under totals are going to be. Like again, it doesn't matter because a lot can happen this offseason, but like if they came out today, I would probably put the Braves just ahead of the Phillies and the Mets, like a win below that, with the knowledge that, injuries can significantly change things as they did for the Braves last year. But, like the position the Phillies are in financially is different than the Dodgers and Mets. That's the reason the Dodgers were able to go out and sign Blake Snell after winning the World Series. The reason the Mets are able to, sign Juan Soto for $765 million. Like Steve Cohen has $20 billion plus, and that's a different spot than any other owner is in. So like teams are just not on the same playing field, and you can't complain about that if you're a Phillies fan because you've reaped the rewards for years now too. But yeah, like the place they're in compared to where these other teams have gone, I guess there's three ways that the Phillies can turn around this whole perception, which would be A, if they win the World Series, B, if they go out and make a big splash move this offseason, next offseason, whenever that is, at the trade deadline, or C, if like Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford and Andrew Painter emerge into like real impactful players over the next couple of years. If that happens, fans get really excited about homegrown prospects. Like when they pan out, that's as exciting for a fan base as when you sign a superstar player. So like if those homegrown prospects do work out, all the trades the Phillies didn't include them in over these last couple of years are going to look like really good moves. So
and I think that's why people were kind of been frustrated. Corey, just going back, like I think Dave just over the last 2 years really hasn't done anything at the deadline and really hasn't done anything in the offseason. But now, and we kind of got it. I took it the way that Dave and the Phillies front office believes in this young core that could be coming up, the Crawford, the Painters, the Millers, and we could see them sooner than people think. And like you said, if they end up panning out, we're going to look back on this offseason. If they don't make any moves and Max Kepler is the big move, they're going to look back on this offseason, and thank Dave Dombrowski for everything he's done. But I think it's just like that. There's like a saying, right, where it's being in the moment, whatever it is, people just get anxious and want something right now. What is it?
Prisoner of the moment.
There it is.
Well, I mean, along those lines, let's not be a prisoner of the moment. You just said Dombrowski hasn't done much in the offseason. That's not true. He hasn't done much at the trade deadline, but they have signed Trey Turner.
Because it was like Whit Merrifield. Right.
Yeah, okay,
right.
But like they did sign Trey Turner, extend Zach Wheeler, extend Aaron Nola. Those are humongous moves. If they didn't have those three guys, where would they be? But yes, there has been disappointment that the Phillies haven't done more at the last two trade deadlines. And then Dave Dombrowski even admitted that after the season. That was telling. He even said, when he looks back at his own trade deadline, it really hurts him that Austin Hayes didn't make as much of an impact as they had hoped. And, Max Kepler better make more of an impact than Austin Hayes. That's all I got to say.
Max Kepler, you got the right field signings, Max Kepler, Juan Soto. I think Max is probably a little bit better than Juan.
There was a graphic.
That's where it relays in the division there.
There was a full-page graphic I saw someone put out on Twitter last night. I don't know when it's from over the last
couple years. I saw
But it was like last 162 games comparing Aaron Judge and Max Kepler. And Kepler had better numbers, but it just if you cherry pick any span of time, you can do something like that.
Oh, hey, real quick before we get going too, our listeners don't care, but my guy to my top right, Corey Seidman, eliminated him from the fantasy football playoffs. Now I'm playing this guy down below for the semifinals.
Wow. Yes.
So this is the Phillies Talk fantasy football. I'm coming. We're here.
Yeah, it's coming for the crown. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who have no baseball and have been eliminated from their fantasy football leagues and just have nothing going on right now. This is
I'm always happy
for those people.
When Sides is eliminated. No offense, Sides. He's always got a good squad.
That's
I know this year his record probably wasn't what it should have been, but when Sides is out, that's good. And so I would
correct. That's why
Spence, your team's great too. So you get to this point in the season, you're only going to face good teams. So
I'll have my eyes peeled, but as long as somebody ends the reign of that dastardly Ricky Battalica, that's all that matters to me.
He's out. He's out. He made the playoffs.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So he's been out. So yeah, it's our NBC Sports Philadelphia Fantasy Football League. It's always
he's probably ranting about He's probably ranting about some unfair treatment on the road.
Yeah, Rick's not one to complain about being slighted. He usually takes things in stride and kind of lets things roll off his back. So certainly a good sport about, to get knocked out of the fantasy football league for sure.
All right, well, good luck to both of you guys, and happy holidays to everybody out there listening to the Phillies Talk podcast or watching on YouTube. We'll be back with you after Christmas, so enjoy. Have a great weekend. Catch you soon.